The night began with silence, the kind that settles over an empty house long after the world has gone to sleep. Outside, the air was heavy, saturated with a lingering mist that crept against the windows, as though searching for a way inside. I had been working late, the clock already brushing past midnight, when I felt it. The sudden drop in temperature, as if someone had opened a door to winter itself. My breath clouded in front of me, even though no draft stirred the curtains. And then, there it was. A faint rustling sound, softer than paper against stone, drew my attention to the desk beside me. Resting there, though I had never heard a knock nor a postman's step, was an envelope. Its surface was pale, almost the color of bone, and damp with a thin film of fog that clung stubbornly to it. A faint scent rose from it, the fragrance of roses, wilted and forgotten, like those left too long at a graveside. I hesitated before touching it. The envelope bore no stamp. No mark of delivery, only a seal pressed deep into the wax. A sigil I could not immediately decipher. Curving letters, intricate and ancient, formed a pattern that seemed to shift when my eyes lingered too long. With trembling fingers, I cracked the seal. Inside was a card, thick and aged, its edges frayed as though it had traveled across centuries. The calligraphy shimmered faintly, written in ink that seemed to bleed silver beneath the light. It read, "You are cordially summoned to the Ghostly Gala, where eternal waltzes spin and secrets of the departed whisper through the halls. Midnight tolls at Blackwood Manor. Cross the veil if you dare. No date, no sender, only the weight of inevitability pressed into every letter." My pulse quickened, my mind swimming with confusion. A party at Blackwood Manor? That place had been abandoned for decades. Its very name spoken only in hushed tones by locals who swore the land itself was cursed. And yet, as my eyes traced the words again, I dropped the card, my hands trembling. A low hum filled the room, not sound exactly, but a vibration in the air, resonating in my chest. It was then that I heard it, a faint whisper, so close it might have been at my ear, though no one stood beside me. Chosen. The word was stretched, drawn out like a note held far beyond breath. My skin prickled, the air around me tightening, heavy with unseen eyes. I turned, certain I would find someone standing there. But the room was empty. Only the invitation lay before me, pulsing faintly, as though it possessed a heartbeat of its own. I told myself to throw it away, to burn it, to rid myself of its presence. But deep inside, something rooted me to the spot. The message was not a request. It was a summons. I had been chosen, though for what purpose I could not yet say. Outside, the mist pressed harder against the windows. Through the veil of fog, a shadow moved, tall and deliberate, gliding past the glass. My breath caught, but before I could react, the figure dissolved into the mist itself, leaving only the faint trace of movement. The clock on the mantel chimed, a sound that rang louder than it should have in the small room. Midnight. The moment the final chime faded, the invitation seemed to throng with life, the words glowing faintly, urging me to accept. My hand closed around the card. Cold burned into my skin as though I'd touched ice. The world tilted slightly, the walls closing in, and for an instant, I swore I could hear music. Distant, delicate, the swelling hum of violins tuning in anticipation. And then, silence. The card no longer glowed, but the decision had already been made. Something had bound me to it, a thread pulled taut between myself and the place named within. I whispered into the empty air, though I didn't know if I spoke from fear or surrender. I'll go. As if in answer, the house sighed. A gust of air swept through the room, scattering papers from my desk, extinguishing the lamp in a single breath. Darkness swallowed me whole. But in that darkness, one thing remained certain. There was no turning back. The invitation had been delivered. The path was set. And beyond the veil of night, Blackwood Manor awaited. A night air clung to me as I stepped outside. The invitation pressed against my chest like a burning brand. The mist that had hovered beyond the windows now engulfed the street entirely, swallowing the familiar world. Lamps that once glowed warm were reduced to pale orbs, barely piercing the veil. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud, though the ground beneath me felt softened, as if I were walking on something less than earth, more than shadow. With each step, the air thickened. The world I knew seemed to peel away, layer by layer. Houses blurred into silhouettes, then dissolved altogether, leaving only endless fog and the faint outline of a path stretching forward. I had no memory of choosing this road, yet my feet moved with certainty, as though guided by an unseen hand. Somewhere beyond, faint music stirred, a low hum of strings. At last, the path ended at wrought iron gates, towering high into the sky. Their metal was blackened and twisted, yet etched with curling patterns that shimmered faintly, alive with ghostly light. Above them, carved into a weathered stone arch, were words I could scarcely read. Letters half erased by time, half devoured by shadow. But I knew what they said. Blackwood Manor. The gates creaked open on their own, the sound sharp, piercing, like a scream dragged across metal. Beyond lay a long drive, lined with skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the night sky. The manor rose in the distance, a silhouette of grandeur and decay. Towers that pierced the heavens, windows aglow with pale light, and walls draped in ivy that looked more like veins than vines. The invitation pulsed once in my hand, urging me forward. My chest tightened, but I obeyed. As I stepped across the threshold, the air shifted. The mist behind me folded in on itself, sealing off the world I had known. A weight pressed against my chest, as though I had passed through water, or perhaps something far denser, thicker than breath or flesh. For a heartbeat, I could not breathe. My vision dimmed, colors draining away. And then, with a rush of sound, the world reformed. The manor's front doors loomed ahead, carved oak, taller than any cathedral gate, etched with scenes of dancers in flowing gowns. Their eyes, though, were hollow, their mouths open, frozen mid-waltz, a dance eternal and silent. The doors swung wide as I approached, welcoming, or perhaps warning. Inside, the atmosphere shifted again. The air was cooler, thinner, but alive with movement. I stood in a grand hall whose marble floors stretched endlessly beneath a vaulted ceiling. Chandeliers hung heavy with crystal, their lights flickering not with flame, but with a glow that seemed woven from starlight itself. Drapes of velvet shimmered between states of decay and splendor, never resting on either. The space shimmered, caught between centuries, one moment pristine, the next crumbling. Time itself bent here, folding in on itself, like the mist that had guided me. And then I saw them. Figures began to emerge, their outlines translucent, glowing faintly as though shaped from candle smoke. They wore gowns and suits from centuries past, powdered wigs, corsets, long coats embroidered with golden thread. Yet their faces were blurred, shifting, some beautiful, some broken, all marked by sorrow. They did not speak, but their eyes, when they found mine, were heavy with recognition, as though they had been waiting for me. One bowed slightly as he drifted past, his shoes leaving no sound on the marble floor. Another brushed by me, and the hem of her gown whispered against my leg like the cold touch of silk dipped in frost. A murmur seemed to ripple through them, though no mouths moved. From the far end of the ballroom, a figure approached, taller than the rest, cloaked in a suit that glimmered faintly as if threaded with moonlight. His presence commanded silence, and the others parted for him. He stopped before me, eyes like twin voids, endless and unknowable. He extended a gloved hand, not in greeting, but in summons. Behind him, the orchestra stirred, invisible players plucking at violins and cellos that resonated with a sound both mournful and exquisite. The figure's lips parted, though no voice emerged. Yet I understood, as clearly as if the words had been spoken aloud. Welcome to the ball. And with that, the spectral waltz began. The air quivered with anticipation as the orchestra awoke from its silence. The instruments, unseen yet undeniable, resonated from every corner of the ballroom. Violins hummed a delicate prelude, cellos thrummed like distant thunder, and a harpsichord plucked a melody that seemed older than memory itself. The music was beautiful, achingly so, but every note was drenched in melancholy, as though each chord carried the grief of centuries. The floor beneath my feet. The spectral guests moved as one, gliding effortlessly across the floor. Their gowns whispered, their coats flared, and their hands rested delicately on partners who were both there and not. They waltzed in perfect circles, their steps synchronized with the sorrowful rhythm. Some smiled faintly, as if reliving the joy of a memory. Others wore expressions locked in despair, faces frozen mid-grief. I stood transfixed, watching the procession unfold like a dream. The dancers' feet made no sound, yet the floor trembled with their passage. Their movements were flawless, yet every so often, one would falter. A dancer would spin alone, searching for a partner who was no longer there. Another clutched a figure who flickered, vanishing between beats, leaving behind only empty arms. It was then I realized they were not merely dancing. They were replaying moments they could never let go. I did not expect to be drawn into it, but as the orchestra swelled, One of the dancers turned her gaze toward me. Her face was veiled in shadow, yet I felt her eyes pierce straight through me. She glided closer, her gown trailing wisps of frost. Without hesitation, she extended her hand. Before I could retreat, her fingers brushed mine. Cold seared my skin, and the world spun violently. For a heartbeat, I wasn't in the ballroom at all. I was in a sunlit garden, the sound of laughter filling the air. She stood there, alive, radiant in her gown of ivory lace, flowers woven into her hair. And then, the scene shattered. Blood stained the roses, her face twisted with anguish, and the sound of laughter dissolved into a scream. I staggered back, my chest heaving. The phantom withdrew, her expression unreadable, before turning and fading back into the waltz. My heart thundered. These weren't just ghosts. They were fragments of lives. I began to notice them individually now. A young man in uniform, medals pinned proudly to his chest, danced with precision, but his chest flickered with a dark wound that never healed. A woman in a tattered gown spun endlessly with no partner, her tears streaming down an invisible face. An old painter, brush still clutched in his hand, moved clumsily through the crowd, as if chasing a muse that had abandoned him. Each of them bore the mark of unfinished stories. Their waltz was not merely a dance. It was a confession, a mourning, a reminder of what bound them here. The music grew more frantic, strings tightening into a fevered pitch. At the far edge of the hall, atop a balcony, I saw him, the conductor. He stood tall, skeletal hands wrapped around a baton that glowed like bone in moonlight. His face was obscured by a porcelain mask, cracked down the middle, and his movements were both elegant and grotesque. With each sweep of his baton, the dancers quickened, their sorrow deepening, their steps becoming more desperate. It struck me then. He was not guiding them. He was controlling them. Each note dragged them deeper into their eternal sorrow, binding them to the rhythm. And yet, despite his command, he never looked at the orchestra. His eyes, sunken and endless, were fixed on me. As the music reached its crescendo, the dancers surged toward me, not menacing, but insistent, their steps circling, enclosing me in their spiral. I felt their stories pressing into me. Grief, betrayal, longing, each one brushing against my soul like ink bleeding into water. My breath hitched, my body trembling, as visions assaulted my mind, ships sinking into black seas, lovers torn apart at altars, artists dying before their work was complete. I stumbled, nearly collapsing. But once more, a hand reached for me. This time it was not cold. It was warm, impossibly warm, pulsing with life. I looked up. Another figure stood before me, unlike the rest. His form was solid, his eyes burning with clarity. He bowed, extending his hand with purpose. The silence after the abrupt halt of the waltz was almost suffocating. The dancers remained frozen, like statues of sorrow and grace, their expressions unreadable, but their presence oppressive. The figure who had spoken to me guided me forward, and I noticed subtle signs in the hall, etched symbols on the walls, faint glows around the chandeliers, and patterns in the floor that seemed to hum with unseen energy. These were the rules, the unspoken laws of the ball. I realized that even the smallest misstep could break the delicate balance that bound this gathering together. Every phantom watched me, eyes glittering with an impossible light. They whispered without words, their gaze a constant reminder that I was an honored, yet vulnerable guest. My guide drifted toward a woman in a gown of pure white, delicate lace torn and frayed with age. Her eyes were pools of sorrow, and her hands clutched a bouquet of blackened roses. As I approached, a vision unfolded around her. A wedding altar under a golden sun. Promises spoken, only for the day to shatter into betrayal. She spun slowly, suspended between memory and reality, caught in the agony of a love that had been stolen from her. The phantom turned her gaze to me, and I understood that her story was a warning as well as a plea to respect their existence, to honor the pain, or risk being consumed by it. From the shadows emerged a tall man in uniform, his metals dulled, his chest adorned with a wound that never healed. His steps were precise, disciplined, yet every movement radiated anguish. Around him, scenes of battle flickered like a broken film reel. Friends lost, betrayals discovered, victories hollow. He danced with shadows of comrades long dead, their hands reaching for him, leaving only emptiness where recognition should have been. The general's eyes met mine, burning with silent accusation. I felt the weight of history pressing down, as though I could see the battles he fought and the choices he regretted. A hunched figure caught my attention next. A painter with a brush clutched in one hand, a palette in the other. Around him, canvases hung suspended in the air, incomplete, colors bleeding into nothingness. He painted endlessly, each stroke a desperate attempt to finish a work he never could, cursed to perfection that eluded him. I could almost feel the weight of his unfulfilled ambition pressing against my mind. He paused, eyes meeting mine. And for an instant, I felt the hunger of a soul trapped between creation and oblivion. He whispered, a faint echo of words I could barely grasp. Remember us. Don't forget. The guide led me to the center of the ballroom, where all the dancers were gathered in a perfect circle. The orchestra began once more, its music soft and melancholic, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to bind each ghost to their story. I realized the truth. This ball was not mere celebration. It was a liminal space, a gathering for souls who had not yet found peace. Each dance, each waltz, each fleeting touch was a ritual, a plea to remember, to honor, or perhaps to let go. The ghosts were not malevolent. They were eternal witnesses, guardians of memory, their existence a bridge between the living and the dead. And now, I had been drawn into their world. The figure who had brought me here paused, his eyes dark pools reflecting the chandelier's fractured light. His voice was soft, yet carried authority beyond mortal comprehension. Respect the circle. Observe the stories. Do not attempt to alter them, he warned. You are a guest, not a participant in their regrets. But remember this. The moment you interfere, even unintentionally, you risk joining them. And some threads, once woven, cannot be undone. A shiver ran down my spine. I nodded, understanding for the first time that I had crossed a threshold from which there was no easy return. To wander here unheeding was dangerous. To act with ignorance could bind me forever. The music swelled, and the circle of dancers began to move again. This time, however, they were not frozen, not bound by their previous despair, but gently spinning in a ritual of remembrance. Each story was a note, each movement a word, and I, a silent witness, felt both awe and fear as the weight of their past pressed into the present. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the grand hall, I sensed a secret yet to be revealed, one that would not show itself until the night was at its darkest. The final notes of the orchestra hung in the air, trembling like a sigh caught between worlds. The dancers slowed, their movements dissolving into stillness, as if the music itself had been the only thing keeping them tethered to this reality. I stood in the center of the ballroom, chest tight, ears ringing with the echoes of violin strings and hollow footsteps. The grandeur of the hall. I began to notice the lingering touches of the ball. A faint melody drifted on the air, almost imperceptible, threading through the silence. The scent of old roses rose again, clinging to my clothes and hair, while a sudden cold brush on my shoulder left a chill that seeped into my bones. Every reflective surface, the polished floor, a shattered mirror, even the gleam in a crystal, held the faint shimmer of a dancer long gone. It became clear that the experience did not simply end when the music stopped. The phantom's presence had seeped into me, marking me as a witness to their eternal ceremony. As I wandered the manor, the walls seemed to shift imperceptibly. A doorway I had just passed reappeared where none had been. The stairs spiraled differently with each glance, and corridors stretched into darkness that seemed infinite. The veil between living and dead had thinned. I could almost reach out and touch the pasts trapped within the dancers. At times, I could swear I heard whispers, fragments of conversations I could not place in time. A bride calling a name in desperation, a general shouting orders in a battlefield, a painter sighing over a canvas that would never be completed. They were not threats, they were echoes, fragments of memory bleeding through into my perception. I finally found a small alcove, dimly lit by a single crystal that refracted the remaining light in fractured patterns. Sitting there, I tried to make sense of what I had witnessed. The ball, the dancers, the stories. They were terrifying, yes, but also hauntingly beautiful. Each phantom was a monument to a life unfinished, a memory preserved in perpetual motion. I felt a strange reverence for them, mingled with a creeping dread. My heartbeat was loud, my breaths shallow, but I could not turn away. It struck me that perhaps there was a purpose beyond mere spectacle. Witnessing their stories was an act of remembrance, a final tribute to lives once lived and never fully released. As I rose to leave, a soft murmur drew my attention. The same figure who had guided me earlier appeared, gliding through the mist. His eyes, voids of understanding and warning, met mine. "You carry their echoes now," he said. "Do not forget, for memory is both blessing and burden." The living can leave, but the dead always linger. And some nights, when the veil thins, they will call you back. A chill wrapped around me, and I realized the truth of his words. The ball was over, for now, but its influence would remain. A faint strain of music tugged at my consciousness, lingering like a shadow at the edge of perception. I stepped into the night outside the manor, the fog pressing gently against my face. The invitation clutched in my hand, now cold and inert. The world seemed unchanged, yet nothing felt the same. The echoes of the phantom waltz followed me, imprinted in my memory, in the rhythm of my heartbeat. And as I walked away, I could not help but wonder, was it truly over? Or had I glimpsed something that would forever pull me back to dance once more among shadows? In the presence of stories that refused to fade, the night whispered an answer, leaving me suspended between fear and fascination, between the living world and the eternal dance I had witnessed. Dawn was fragile and pale, spilling through the trees as I walked away from Blackwood Manor. The fog had thinned, but an unnatural quiet lingered, pressing on my ears as though the world itself was holding its breath. Each step felt weighted, not by distance, but by the remnants of what I had witnessed. The invitation, now inert in my pocket, seemed to hum faintly against my palm, a memory of a pull I could not resist. I glanced back once. The manor's silhouette had softened, fading into mist, yet in the corner of my vision a shadow lingered, watching, waiting. I blinked and it was gone, leaving only uncertainty behind. As the day unfolded, I noticed subtle signs that the spectral influence had not entirely left. The faint strains of music rose behind closed doors. A cold whisper brushed my hair, unexpectedly, and reflections in mirrors seemed to shimmer with forms I could not place. It was as if a thread had been woven between me and the ball, invisible yet unbreakable. I realized I was changed. No longer a mere observer, I had become part of the lingering story. The veil had thinned for me, and I carried its weight, a secret dance echoing in the corners of my mind. Friends and strangers passed me by, unaware of what had transpired, unaware that I had stepped into a realm where time and memory twisted upon themselves. I tried to speak of it, to describe the grandeur, the sorrow, the eternal waltz, but words failed me. How could one convey the beauty of grief, the elegance of despair, or the haunting pull of stories unfinished? And yet, I could feel them. The dancers, the bride, the general, the artist, each pressing gently against the edges of my awareness, as if reminding me that I was never truly alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a subtle chill ran down my spine. In the window of an abandoned building, I saw movement, a flicker of a gown, a ghostly outline. The world appeared unchanged, yet I knew it was not. Somewhere, beyond the visible, beyond the known, the ball continued. Perhaps it always had. Perhaps it always would. I shivered, half in fear, half in anticipation. The memory of that conductor's gaze, the pull of unseen hands, haunted me. The veil was thinner than ever, and I could feel it brushing close, whispering invitations in tones only I could hear. As night fell, I stood on the edge of the forest that bordered the manor's estate, listening. Faint strains of a violin drifted on the wind, so soft I could barely grasp them. The invitation pulsed once more in my pocket, a reminder that the story was not finished. The night seemed alive, and I knew without doubt that I had been marked, chosen not for closure, but for continuation. I whispered into the darkness, almost hoping for a reply. And somewhere, beyond the reach of eyes and reason, a voice answered, not in words, but in the subtle, unending rhythm of the phantom waltz. I walked away, yet the echo of the gala clung to me like a second skin. The world around me was unchanged, yet I could feel the weight of other lives brushing past, each story spinning silently in the shadows. Blackwood Manor, the Ghostly Gala, the dancers, they were not gone. They waited, patient and eternal, for the next moment, the next soul to join the eternal waltz. And in that knowledge, a shiver of both dread and fascination ran through me. The dance was endless, and I had glimpsed its rhythm. The veil might lift again, and when it did, I would hear the summons. And perhaps someday, I would cross the threshold once more.